Hello and welcome to Tech Deal's graphics card performance comparison. Today we are testing two different graphics cards, the Asus Republic of Gamers Strix GeForce GTX 1070 and the EVGA for the win GeForce GTX 1080 graphics card. Both of these cards are installed in the $1,500 custom build PC with an Intel i7-7700k CPU. The complete video series on this computer is linked in the video description below. If you have not seen it, please go check it out. It is an amazing value for the money. A full set of videos is included: build, parts overview, the why vlog, the decision making behind it, Windows setup and installation, performance, and more. Go check it out in the video description below. We are testing these cards today at both 1440p and 2160p, otherwise known as 4K resolution at ultra detail presets. Anti-aliasing is turned on and VSync is turned off. Fraps was used for the minimum, maximum, and average game performance numbers you will see at the end of this video. It was not, however, used to capture the video you're watching. Instead, NVIDIA's Shadowplay was used for video capture. Shadowplay video capture does cause an average of 5% performance loss of the frame rate, so your actual performance will be ever so slightly better than what you see in this video. The numbers in green at the top left corner of the screen are from Msi Afterburner, a free program you can download from MSI.com for real-time information on what your computer is doing while you're playing games. Take a look at the numbers now. The first line is our graphics card, the GTX 1070. The 99% means we're using all of the graphics compute performance of this card. It is running at 60 degrees Celsius and the fan is turning at 39% of its maximum speed. The actual revolutions are about 1400 RPM and our clock speed on the chip is just under 2 gigahertz. Please note, I have not manually overclocked any of these cards. These are running at the default clock speed. GPU Boost, which is part of the NVIDIA 10 series cards, auto overclocks these cards so long as power and temperature allow. As you can see here, we are running well above the standard clock speed. Now, both of these cards are factory overclock cards, but they are not clocked to 2 gigahertz from the factory. This is GPU Boost in action. I changed no settings from their default factory ship settings, so these are running at faster than normal speed because temperature and power delivery allow it. I have said in previous videos that there is no appreciable difference in performance between various cards of different manufacturers that use the same graphics chip. A GTX 1070 is generally a GTX 1070 is generally a GTX 1070. Now, I've posted many game performance videos in the past using EVGA 1070 cards. This is the first time I've posted game videos using the Asus Republic of Gamers Strix card. Basically, it's the same performance. If you look at the second line, that's our 8 gigabytes of VRAM. We're using about half of it at the moment. Now, how much we use does depend upon which map is loaded. Some maps use more than others. This one is using about 4 gigabytes. Our RAM is running at 4 gigahertz. It's DDR memory, so double that to an effective 8 gigahertz. Our i7-7700k CPU, which is running at 5 gigahertz, we're currently using about half of it. Now, in this location, in this map, we're using about 4 of our cores. We're not into the hyper-threading at the moment. Give it a second, we'll be into it in other sections. Now, the temperature is warm because of the heavy overclock. Because I have this forced to 5 gigahertz, that's why we're running at about 80 degrees Celsius. I do have a 120 millimeter cooler on this CPU. A 280 millimeter cooler would help. It would probably take 4 to 5 degrees off of that. Our fourth line is our main system RAM, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 megahertz RAM. Yes, that's overclocked, but the RAM comes rated at that speed, so it runs absolutely perfectly. We're using about 8.5 gigabytes of that RAM at the moment. Please note that that will increase as the resolution and detail increase. We're on a desert map, which is not as complex. It does get over 10 gigabytes on some maps and some resolutions. Finally, that's the amount of memory that's allocated for the system at the moment. That does not include the memory used for the disk cache. Several people have posted and asked me, what about running 8 gigabytes of RAM? Do I really need 16 gigs of RAM? If you're playing Battlefield 1, will it run in 8 gigs of RAM? Yes. Will it run smoother in 16 gigs of RAM? Yes. I do plan to do a video on that at some point, but yes, it will run smoother. The lows will be better. The overall responsiveness of the system is better with 16 gigs of RAM. Finally, the final number on there, Direct3D 11, that's our DirectX 11. We're getting 80 frames per second, 90 frames per second. This thing flies. Basically, with a GTX 1070 and an i7 CPU, you can play all the games available on the market today at 1440p resolution at 60 plus frames per second average, usually at ultra detail. Now, some of them are not going to play at ultra, you'll have to lower it down to high, but at some reasonable high-ish level of detail, you can basically play all the games on the market at 1440p at 60 plus frames per second average on this $1,500 build. It's a great machine. It is really, really fast. All right, that's enough of this one. Let's take a look at what happens when we put a GTX 1080 in. Here we are with the EVGA for the win GTX 1080 graphics card. Now these next 3 videos will be much quicker. I did the explanation, so I'm just going to show you a minute or 2 of footage. Performance in Battlefield 1 is very stable. Once you're on a map, once you're at a given detail setting, the actual frame rate does not tend to vary by a lot. So, taking a look at our performance, yes, the GPU is fully utilized, temperature is reasonable, the fan speed is very reasonable, clock speed is 2 gigahertz, just like the previous card. That's GPU boost in action. Our VRAM use is higher. This particular map is more dense and there's more on it, so we're just under 5 gigabytes, but that's fine, and we have our 10 gigahertz of RAM. Our CPU usage is higher. This is a more demanding map. You will see this there, just jump to 60, 64. Anytime we're over 50%, there's 70, 72%, we're into our hyperthreading. This is why I don't recommend an i5 if you can afford it if you're playing Battlefield 1. This game really loves more than 4 threads, and it will perform better if you have an i7 over an i5. Please note, that does not mean it's faster, that means it's smoother. That's an important distinction. The average frame rate will not be higher on an i7. The minimum frame rate will be higher. The dips, the valleys, the stutters, the lag will be better. That's what the i7 will give you versus the i5 in this game. Again, the temperature is warm. That's because we've got it overclocked. Main system RAM is just under 9 gigabytes, and our frame rate, take a look at this, we're over 100 frames per second. This continues. It basically doesn't change throughout this gameplay. I could show you more, but I'm going to cut this now, and we're going to switch to 4K 2160p on the 2 cards so you can see what that looks like. Alright, here we are back on the GTX 1070, the Asus Strix Republic of Gamers card, but now we are at 4K or 2160p resolution. Again, the detail settings are set to Ultra, and you will see the difference in performance looking at the real-time frame rate on the 5th line of the MSI real-time numbers in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Now this is a grass and hilly map. It is rather intensive, but it really isn't that different than the last one I showed you on the GTX 1080, which was also a foresty, grassy map. Our GPU usage is at 100%, our temperature is at 62, the fan speed's reasonable, the clock speed is again back to 2 gigahertz, same as it was on the previous 2 runs. The VRAM usage is just under 5 gigabytes. Take a look at our CPU usage. It jumps above 50% and then jumps down, jumps above 50% and then jumps down. It depends on where you are at the map, how many characters are around you, so on and so forth. Take a look at our main system RAM. We are at 10 gigabytes. Now we are at 4K resolution. There's a lot more going on, so that definitely affects the performance of the game and the need for 16 gigs of RAM. But if you've got a 4K monitor and you're planning on building a $1,500 machine, you should have 16 gigs in it. If you look at our real-time frame rate there, we are under 60 frames per second. Now, this should not surprise you. The GTX 1070 is not really a 4K gaming graphics card. It will play games at 4K. It will certainly play Overwatch fine at 4K, and there's others it will play. I will show some other videos in the future. Actually, it does pretty well depending upon what you're doing. Battlefield 1, not so much. Not to worry, let's go take a look at how well it plays on the GTX 1080 at 4K. And here we are at 4K resolution on the GTX 1080. Now, in fairness, if you really want to play at 4K resolution, let me make this easy for you. Get a GTX 1080. It's really 1080 or bust. Certainly if you want to play AAA games such as Battlefield 1, Rise of the Tomb Raider, Assassin's Creed Syndicate, Dishonored 2, if you want to play modern quality games such as this, at 4K, you need a 1080. You might even need two of them. There are a few games that are pretty rough at ultra detail. Now, as you watch this gameplay, I want you to keep something in mind. We are close to, but not quite at 60 frames per second most of the time. Lowering the detail settings from ultra to high would make all the difference in the world, and I can tell you from experience this actually plays really nicely at high detail. So if you're willing to compromise slightly and set most games to high detail instead of ultra detail, a single GTX 1080 is actually enough most of the time. However, I will not make the claim that it will play all current games at 4K resolution just fine at reasonable detail at 60 frames a second, because it won't. There are a couple where it really doesn't do 4K at all. Battlefield 1, it does. Rise of the Tomb Raider, pretty good. Others, not so much. I'll show those in future videos. But at high detail, I can tell you at 4K, this is a really, really nice experience. It's actually completely playable at Ultra, except during the very times you need it to be really, really good, when you want that good frame rate when you're in the middle of heavy, heavy combat. All right, that's enough of this. Let's go take a look at the results. And here we are at the results. Let's deal with the 1440p resolution first on the GTX 1070. 89 frames per second average with a minimum of 60. On the GTX 1080, we had 109 frames per second average with a minimum of 73. Basically, both cards play this game perfectly, but the 1080 plays it about 20 to 25% faster. At 1440p, you really don't need more than a 1070 if you're playing games such as Battlefield 1. What about 4K? Now, neither of these cards will maintain a minimum of 60 frames per second of 4K, but the 1080 will average 60 frames per second. The 1070 will not. 49 and 60 frames per second, respectively, those are about 22% apart. 11 frames per second may not seem like a lot, but I can tell you from experience the smoothness and playability of Battlefield 1 at 4K is much improved on the GTX 1080 over the 1070. The minimum frame rates were about the same distance apart as well, 36 minimum and 45 minimum respectively. As I said before, if you set this game to high detail instead of ultra, it is eminently smooth and playable at 60 frames per second on the GTX 1080. It's better on the 1070, but I would set it to medium on a 1070 at 4K rather than high, so you're looking at a notch or two detail difference in terms of performance and quality. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel using the big huge red button directly below this video. Post your comments below the video, and as always, check out the video description for everything I talked about in this video. The computer, the graphics cards, the whole build video series on this machine. Furthermore, links to these video cards to both Amazon and Newegg will also be in the video description below. If you liked my video, if you found this helpful and informative, and you decide to buy anything from Amazon or Newegg, please check out my links down there for the best deals. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching my channel. I will see you next time.